What's going on, everyone? It's the Fantasy Football Almanac, back at it with another fantasy football video. Today we're going to be talking about lessons learned from Week 8 of the NFL season, but before we get into it, if you guys could, please go down and give this video a like. I am answering every single comment, so if you have any fantasy football related questions, please go down to the comments and leave them below, and subscribe to the channel, turn that notification bell on so you do not miss another video. With that out of the way, let's get right into it of the first game of the week. For the first game this week, the Ravens versus the Bucs, I had a few main takeaways. I would say the number one thing is that from the Ravens side, you cannot trust any of these running backs on a week-to-week basis, whether it be Kenyon Drake, whether it be Gus Edwards, even Justice Hill sometimes gets involved, so you really never know who the lead back is going to be on that day. They tend to ride the hot hand. I mean, we see Kenyon Drake get 7 carries and still put up 14 fantasy points, but Gus Edwards get 11 carries and only have 6.5. But then last week, we see Gus Edwards have 18.5 fantasy points on only 36% of snaps, and Kenyon Drake relegated to only a half a point of fantasy scoring. So I can't really trust any of these guys on a week-to-week basis. Maybe once Dobbins comes back, it will be interesting to see, but I think it will only muck up the situation further, at least for the rest of the fantasy football season, because J.K. Dobbins is going to be coming back around week 14, week 15-ish, and that's going to be right around playoff season. I would not want to start J.K. Dobbins in that type of situation. I would not want to start any of these guys in that type of situation, and I would try and trade them if you can. From the Bucs side, I would say Tom Brady still isn't really looking like his old self, and by old self, I mean self from last year. But we did see Chris Godwin at least have a decent game, getting 11 total targets. Mike Evans have a good game, and Leonard Fournette also have a Leonard Fournette type game of 13 points. Moving on to our next game, we got the Broncos versus the Jaguars. And this game proved to us a few things, especially on the running back side. One, we see Etienne gobbling up every single carry, 24 carries for 156 yards and a touchdown. He looks phenomenal out there, like one of the best running backs in the whole NFL right now. He's kind of scary. If you have him, good on you. You deserve a pat on the back. But we also see JaMycal Hasty being the backup in this offense. Snoop Conner not even getting a touch. JaMycal Hasty at least getting 4 carries for 13 yards and another 4 targets. So if you are worried you need an insurance back for Travis Etienne, you know exactly where to look. Go to JaMycal Hasty. Then on the Broncos side, we see Latavius Murray actually get more carries than Melvin Gordon and be more efficient than Melvin Gordon. Well, yes, it is a small sample size. That still is something to note. Well, yes, Melvin Gordon did lead all running backs in targets for the team. We also did see Latavius Murray get 2 targets. He was a little bit more involved. This is concerning. I wouldn't really want either of these guys because currently their situation right now is that they're on a bad offense. And splitting carries. I mean, just really concerning. The volume is not going to be there on any given week for either of these two guys. I thought it would be better for Melvin Gordon, but I guess not. But anyways, let's move on to our next game at perhaps the most exciting game of the entire week, and I was not expecting to say that going in. We got the Carolina Panthers and P.J. Walker versus Marcus Mariota and the Falcons. I mean, this game was just crazy. For anyone that watched it, they enjoyed a shootout. We saw P.J. Walker throw a 62-yard touchdown to D.J. Moore in the final seconds of the game on the Panthers' dying breath. And then D.J. Moore, he celebrates a little bit too hard, moves the field goal or the extra point back, and they miss the extra point, go into overtime, miss another field goal, and lose. If you're a Panthers fan, I am sorry, although you're probably happy about it because you're hoping for a quarterback in the draft. But anyways, let's get into the lessons learned. So the first lesson learned from this game is D'Onta Foreman is absolutely that guy. You can trust him to be a running back too. Honestly, for the rest of the season, I will say the one concern is that Chuba Hubbard was not playing this week, and he will most likely be back. We saw D'Onta Foreman get 26 carries, 118 yards, and 3 total touchdowns with the 2-point conversion. They clearly trust this guy to do it all. We saw Spencer Brown pretty much relegated to 6 carries. Well, I think Chuba Hubbard will be more involved than that. If we're seeing 20 carries for D'Onta Foreman on any given week, that puts him in a really, really good spot for fantasy, a guy you can trust, especially if your running back situation is not that great. He's one of the biggest boom prospects for the rest of the season. I don't even think it's close. I think he's one of the most valuable second half pickup guys for the rest of the season. If he's somehow on your waiver wire still, which I couldn't imagine him being, but if he is somehow still on your waiver wire, go out and get him, please. And then from the Falcons side, I also want to talk about the running backs. I cannot trust any of these running backs here, whether we're talking about Algier, whether we're talking about Caleb Huntley. There's just no guy I really can trust, especially with Damian Williams potentially coming back this week. We also have Patterson most likely coming back before season's end. I would not want a single one of these guys. The next game we got is the Bears versus the Cowboys. And this game, we see Khalil Herbert actually getting more carries than David Montgomery, which is pretty surprising. Khalil Herbert getting 16 carries for 99 yards. David Montgomery only getting 15 carries for 53 yards. That seems like the run-of-the-mill story for this team. Khalil Herbert getting more yards on less work, but this time he's actually getting more work here, puts up 16 fantasy points. And then on the Cowboys side, we have Tony Pollard dropping 33 fantasy points, getting 14 carries for 131 yards. He looked really dominant out there. I mean, it was scary how good he looked. As a Giants fan especially, very, very scary how good he looked. My other takeaway is you don't need to worry about CD and Dak anymore. I mean, they're going to be fine together. Yes, they will have some rough patches. But at the same time, CD Lamb's too talented of a player to not put up good fantasy option, or to not be a good fantasy option. The next game I want to talk about is the Dolphins versus the Lions, and this game was actually, a pretty ridiculous shootout. The Lions, of course, always giving us good, entertaining football in losses. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, we see Tua drop 29 fantasy points, 29 of 36 for almost 400 yards. He looked really good out there, and we see him support two fantasy wide receivers yet again in Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I think this is going to be a rest of season thing, where maybe Tyreek Hill has a bit more yards, Jaylen Waddle has some more touchdowns. These two look unstoppable out there. They get so wide open. And Tua's got to be in the conversation now for top 15 quarterback in regular football, not even just for fantasy, but for fantasy football. Next year, he's got to be in the conversation for a top 12 quarterback. There's no doubt in my mind about it. He's one of the most undervalued quarterbacks in the entire NFL. And then from the Lions side, I just want to say, rest in peace, poor DAndre Swift. What the heck is going on with him? He gets 5 carries for 6 yards. His day is salvaged with some receiving work and receiving touchdown. But if you're a DAndre Swift owner, this is not what you're expecting. He's a very efficient running back, but you're not expecting Jamal Williams to have 21 fantasy points, 10 carries, 53 yards, and 2 touchdowns. What the heck? I feel terrible. But DAndre Swift, I realistically don't even know if you want to start him with what is going on here. You have to, but I really hope you have Jamal Williams too. You almost have to start both of them at this point. So I'm sorry for any DAndre Swift owner. I wasn't really judging too much DAndre Swift, but I am super sorry for you guys. It's a tough situation. Next up, we got the Vikings versus the Cardinals. And my takeaway from the Cardinals side, there are two. I'm sure you guys know one of them, but I'll get into the less obvious one first. Benjamin might not be as good as we saw him be last week because the Cardinals are most likely going to be in a lot of negative game scripts here. 9 carries, 22 yards. Wasn't really too heavily utilized. He did get 7 targets, which is pretty good. But only 6.5 fantasy points. Once James Conner is back, Benjamin's going to be relegated to pretty much nothing. And then we see DeAndre Hopkins potentially be the steal of the year in fantasy football. 28 fantasy points in half PPR scoring in his second game back from a 6-game suspension. 13 targets and 14 targets in the last game. Wow. If you have DeAndre Hopkins, you are going to be the happiest man alive here. He's potentially a league winner where you are getting him. Good for you. Good for you. From the Vikings side, there isn't too much to talk about. We see Dalvin Cook feast. Justin Jefferson, as his usual, 100 yards. Didn't get a touchdown, though, so maybe we're a bit disappointed with his overall performance. But still, 13 points is fine without a touchdown. We see Kirk Cousins have 23 fantasy points. It's the usual from the Vikings camp. And then the last game I want to talk about is the Saints versus the Raiders. And if you're a Raiders fan, I am sorry. Jarrett Stidham in fantasy actually outscored Derek Carr despite having only half the amount of attempts that Derek Carr did. It was a painful one for any Derek Carr owner in fantasy football. But on the bright side, the Saints offense has been looking really, really good this season. If you are a Chris Olave owner, if you are an Alvin Kamara owner, even Andy Dalton looks like a viable fantasy starter at this point. So if you own pieces of the Saints offense, I'm sure you are a pretty happy fantasy owner. And the one thing I will say, this is for very deep leagues. So if you're in a standard 12-man, 10-man league, I don't think he's worth a roster spot. But if you are in a 12-man dynasty league, 10-man dynasty league, even with like 30, 35 roster spots, go out and pick up Rashid Shaheed. I don't think anyone was expecting him to be great. I mean, he was signed off the practice squad a mere 3 weeks ago by the Saints. But every time he gets the ball in his hands, he makes magic happen. Watch his highlights. Watch his 3 NFL highlights. You'll be like, oh my God, this guy's crazy. Why don't they get him the ball more? I think his snap count is only going to go up. He gets 3 targets, 3 receptions this past week, 23% of snaps, up from 13 and 14% in the past 2 weeks. Please, please, please go out and get him if you're in a deep league. Worst comes to worst, he's nothing. He's going to be relegated back to the practice squad. But this guy, watch his like 4 plays. You will see this guy has talent. You will see this guy has speed, everything. But anyways, guys, that is it for my part 1 of lessons learned. If you guys want to see part 2, it will be coming out tomorrow. Be on the lookout for it. But I hope you guys did enjoy. If you guys did, please go down, give this video a like. Again, I am answering all fantasy football related comments. So if you have any questions relating to fantasy football, please go ask me down below. And subscribe to the channel. Turn that notification bell on so you do not miss another video. But with that, that is going to be it. If you guys did enjoy, as always, have a good day, a good night, and a good life.